Imagine a morning that begins like any other. An accomplished surgeon, Dr. Marcus Bennett, hurrying through an airport, his mind focused on a groundbreaking medical conference. But what starts as an ordinary trip takes a shocking turn at a security checkpoint. In just moments, a calm and dignified man becomes the center of a viral storm, challenging an unjust system. This story isn't just about one incident. It's about the fight for respect, the cost of courage, and the power of a single voice to inspire global change. Stay tuned. Before diving into today's powerful story, make sure to subscribe to Behind the Hate, the channel where we uncover real-life stories of prejudice, resilience, and justice. If you're passionate about stories that expose hidden biases and inspire change, this is the place for you. Let's get into today's story. Dr. Marcus Bennett, a celebrated cardiac surgeon with a reputation for brilliance under pressure, had an air of confidence as he stepped into Atlanta International Airport that morning. Dressed sharply in a tailored navy blue suit, his demeanor radiated purpose. Today was no ordinary travel day. He was en route to Los Angeles for a groundbreaking presentation at a global medical summit, where his research could redefine life-saving procedures. The private terminal was bustling with travelers, many in suits and carrying briefcases, as staff moved efficiently to manage the morning crowd. Marcus was familiar with this world, having traveled extensively for medical conferences and consultations. He approached the security checkpoint, placing his sleek black duffel bag on the conveyor belt, his medical instruments meticulously packed within. "Good morning," Marcus greeted the security officer, James Peterson, with polite assurance, handing over his ID and boarding pass. Peterson, a stocky man with a no-nonsense attitude, glanced briefly at the documents before giving Marcus a second, lingering look. "What's your business today?" Peterson asked, his tone professional but curt. "I'm heading to Los Angeles for a medical conference," Marcus replied evenly. Peterson didn't respond immediately. Instead, he scrutinized the ID more closely, flipping it over as if expecting to find something unusual. "Hold on, sir. Step aside for additional screening," he said abruptly. Surprised but unfazed, Marcus complied, stepping to the designated area. He had been through heightened security before, especially when transporting specialized medical equipment. However, something felt off this time. The other passengers, all moving through with relative ease, began to glance over, their curiosity piqued. Peterson waved over a colleague and gestured toward Marcus's bag. "What's in here?" he asked sharply. "Medical tools, surgical instruments," Marcus replied. "They're delicate, so I'd appreciate it if we handle them carefully." The officer's gaze hardened. "We'll see about that. Open it up," as Marcus unzipped the bag, exposing gleaming surgical equipment designed for precise, life-saving procedures. Murmurs rippled through the growing line behind him. A teenage girl near the front discreetly began recording with her phone. "Why do you even need this on a flight?" Peterson pressed, picking up one of the instruments with less care than Marcus would have liked. "These are for my presentation," Marcus said, keeping his tone even despite the rising frustration. "I'm a cardiac surgeon. My credentials—" "I'll be the judge of that," Peterson interrupted, his voice edged with skepticism. The tension in the air became palpable. A man further back in line muttered, "What's taking so long? He doesn't look like trouble." Another chimed in, "This is overkill." The guy's clearly a professional. Marcus took a deep breath, refusing to let his growing frustration take control. "I've complied with every regulation," he said firmly but calmly. "What exactly is the issue here?" Peterson crossed his arms. "Random screenings are standard. Just doing my job." But to Marcus, and increasingly to the onlookers, it didn't feel random. The questioning, the delay, and the excessive handling of his belongings painted a different picture. The growing audience of travelers began whispering among themselves, and a teenage girl with her phone subtly adjusted her angle to capture more of the unfolding scene. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus remained composed, but internally he was calculating the stakes. Missing this flight wasn't just an inconvenience. It meant delaying or even derailing his opportunity to share life-changing innovations with the world. What began as a routine security check was now spiraling into something far more consequential, setting the stage for a confrontation that would challenge not only Marcus's patience, but also his belief in fair treatment and professionalism. As Dr. Marcus Bennett stood calmly in the designated screening area, he noticed the crowd growing restless. The murmurs and side glances intensified, turning his private ordeal into a public spectacle. He wasn't unfamiliar with scrutiny. His career demanded meticulous attention to detail, but this was different. There was no reason for it, no justification beyond what felt like thinly veiled suspicion. Peterson continued to rifle through Marcus's bag, his movements more invasive than necessary. A pair of polished surgical scissors slipped out of their protective case, clattering onto the table. Marcus winced, but maintained his composure. "Please, those tools are incredibly precise. Mishandling them could damage." "Sir, I know how to handle a bag," Peterson snapped, cutting him off. A younger security officer, clearly less seasoned, approached with uncertainty etched on his face. "Do we need to involve a supervisor?" he asked, his voice low but audible enough for Marcus to catch. Peterson shot him a look that could freeze water. "I've got this." The dynamic was clear. Peterson was determined to assert control, regardless of the situation's reality. Marcus, meanwhile, recognized the precarious position he was in. Challenging authority too directly could escalate the situation further, but remaining passive wouldn't resolve anything either. "Officer," Marcus began, keeping his tone measured, "if there's an issue with my credentials or my belongings, I'd appreciate clarity. I have documentation to verify everything." He gestured to his medical ID and a letter from the conference organizers in his suit pocket. Peterson ignored the gesture, instead signaling to a nearby officer. "Call for additional screening," he ordered, as though Marcus hadn't spoken. The whispers among the travelers grew louder. "This is ridiculous," an older woman in a business suit muttered. "What's his crime?" "Being too professional." The teenage girl with the phone had grown bolder, angling her camera for a better shot. She whispered to her mother, "I think he's a doctor or something. Why are they treating him like this?" Marcus, ever aware of his surroundings, noticed her recording. He wasn't entirely comfortable being the center of attention, but part of him welcomed the documentation. If this interaction went south, someone would have evidence of what truly happened. Another officer arrived, this one older and more authoritative. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, glancing between Peterson and Marcus. "Routine additional screening," Peterson replied curtly, though his tone lacked conviction. The senior officer scanned the situation, taking in Marcus's calm demeanor, the open bag of surgical tools, and the murmuring crowd. "Sir," he addressed Marcus, "do you have any restricted items or substances we should know about?" "Absolutely not," Marcus said firmly. "I've traveled with this equipment countless times, and I've never had an issue. You're welcome to inspect everything, but I prefer it done respectfully." The senior officer nodded, his expression neutral but professional. "Let's expedite this. Dr. Bennett, do you have a contact for the event you're attending? We'll verify your credentials." Marcus handed over his letter without hesitation, relieved to finally have someone willing to listen. As the officer stepped aside to make a call, Peterson's jaw tightened. His authority was being questioned, and he didn't like it. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. Marcus knew this wasn't over. The supervisor's involvement might resolve the immediate issue, but the damage had already been done. The crowd's growing interest, the teenage girl's camera, and Peterson's increasingly defensive behavior hinted that this incident was about to take on a life of its own. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one adding to the mounting pressure. Marcus remained composed, but the indignity of it all weighed on him. He had traveled the world, worked with some of the brightest minds in medicine, and yet here he was treated like a criminal simply because of his appearance. The senior officer returned after what seemed like an eternity, holding his phone to his ear. Marcus could see the slight shift in the officer's demeanor, a subtle but noticeable change. After a moment, the officer hung up and turned to Peterson. "There's no issue with Dr. Bennett's credentials. Let him go." Peterson, however, was not satisfied. His gaze flicked to Marcus, then to the surrounding crowd, which was now growing in size. People had begun pulling out their phones. Some were recording, some just watching with disbelief. The power of a viral moment was undeniable, and Peterson realized too late that he was standing in the middle of one. "Are we really going to let him go like this?" Peterson spat, his voice edged with frustration. The senior officer's tone hardened. "Yes, we are. You can't keep someone detained without cause." This was a mistake. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and frustration. The ordeal wasn't over. This was only the beginning. As he stood to collect his things, a security guard stepped forward. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, sir," the guard said, though his apology felt hollow. Marcus nodded curtly, adjusting his coat and gathering his belongings. But as he walked past Peterson, he couldn't resist one final comment. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was a violation of respect. "I don't care how many procedures you follow. If you don't treat people like human beings, nothing will ever change." The words hung in the air as he walked out of the screening area, the eyes of the onlookers following his every step. He knew the damage had already been done. The world would soon see this moment, and they would know that this was not just about him. It was about the systemic biases that still ran deep in society. Outside the terminal, the air felt cooler. He inhaled deeply, taking in the familiar scent of a busy airport. But his mind was far from calm. He knew this was bigger than just one incident. It was part of a much larger problem. He was determined to make sure his voice would be heard, no matter what it took. In the days that followed, the story would explode across social media. Videos from the incident flooded the internet, and soon, the hashtag #RespectMatters was trending worldwide. The question now was not whether Marcus had been wronged, but what society was going to do about it. The morning after the incident, Marcus Bennett awoke to a flood of notifications on his phone. Messages, emails, and social media alerts had multiplied overnight. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers had reached out. The viral video had taken on a life of its own, spreading across platforms like wildfire. Clips of Marcus standing tall amidst the security officers, his composed but firm demeanor, had struck a chord with millions. Comment threads were ablaze with support and outrage. People praised his calmness and questioned the blatant profiling. Marcus's first reaction was to avoid the spotlight. He wasn't looking for fame or attention. But as the day progressed, he realized this wasn't just about him anymore. His case had become a rallying cry for others who had experienced similar discrimination. The hashtags #RespectMatters and #StandWithMarcus were trending worldwide, with countless people sharing their own stories of bias and mistreatment. Calls from journalists and news outlets started pouring in. Major media organizations wanted interviews. Advocacy groups reached out, offering to support him if he chose to take legal action. It was overwhelming, but Marcus knew he needed to control the narrative. By mid-afternoon, Marcus agreed to a single televised interview with a trusted journalist. Sitting across from the anchor in a well-lit studio, he recounted the events of the previous day with poise and clarity. "It wasn't just about me being detained," Marcus explained. "It was about how easily assumptions can turn into actions, and how those actions can strip someone of their dignity." The interview was powerful and unflinching. Marcus shared his story, but also spoke of the broader issues of systemic bias. He urged viewers to reflect on their own behaviors and challenge discriminatory practices wherever they saw them. By the time the segment aired that evening, Marcus had already become a household name. The response was overwhelming. Advocacy groups began organizing protests, and petitions demanding reform at the airport gained tens of thousands of signatures within hours. But not all the feedback was positive. Marcus found himself the target of criticism and even hate. Comments on social media questioned his actions, claiming he had overreacted or played the victim. Others tried to dig into his past, searching for ways to discredit him. It was a reminder that standing up for what was right often came with a cost. But Marcus was undeterred. He knew the truth of what had happened, and he was determined to use the momentum to push for real change. As night fell, Marcus sat in his living room, sifting through messages of support and scrolling through the news. He realized that this was no longer just about a single moment at an airport. It was about confronting a much larger issue, one that affected millions around the world. Tomorrow, he would begin planning his next steps. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of the fight for justice and respect. As Marcus's story continued to gain traction, the corporate offices of the airport authority and the private security firm responsible for the checkpoint were thrown into chaos. Executives huddled in emergency meetings, struggling to craft a response that could quell the public outrage. The initial corporate statement released that morning was terse and defensive, claiming standard procedures were followed. The public backlash was immediate. Social media erupted with demands for transparency and accountability. Advocacy groups accused the airport of downplaying systemic bias. Meanwhile, inside the security firm, tensions ran high. Employees whispered about the incident as the footage circulated internally. Many staff members felt uneasy about the way Marcus had been treated, but few dared to speak up. The supervisor on duty during the incident, Robert Higgins, found himself at the center of scrutiny. Higgins was a veteran in the field, but his rigid adherence to profiling practices had long been a point of contention. Some colleagues described him as thorough. Others said he was overzealous. Now his career was on the line. That evening, Marcus's attorney, Angela Carter, held a press conference. A sharp and charismatic advocate, Angela emphasized the broader implications of Marcus's ordeal. "This isn't just about one man or one airport," she stated. "It's about dismantling systems that perpetuate bias and harm." Angela announced plans to file a formal complaint against both the airport authority and the security firm, demanding an independent investigation. She also hinted at pursuing legislative changes to ensure more accountability in airport security practices. The press conference only intensified the spotlight. News outlets began running investigative pieces, exposing troubling patterns of profiling and mistreatment at the airport. Former passengers came forward with their stories, adding fuel to the growing fire. Behind the scenes, the CEO of the security firm, Daniel Hartman, faced mounting pressure. His board demanded swift action to protect the company's reputation. Hartman ordered an immediate review of training protocols and reached out to Marcus's team, offering a private apology and a settlement. But Marcus wasn't interested in hush money. He wanted systemic change. Angela relayed his message clearly. "We're not looking for a Band-Aid. We're looking for transformation." As the night wore on, protests began forming outside the airport, with demonstrators holding signs that read, "Dignity for all and stop the bias." The movement was gaining momentum, and Marcus's quiet resolve had sparked something far bigger than he had anticipated. As the protests outside the airport swelled, Marcus found himself reluctantly stepping into a role he had never sought. While he had initially hoped to resolve the situation quietly, the overwhelming public response made it impossible to retreat. News channels were flooded with discussions about Marcus's case, with commentators debating everything from racial profiling in airport security to the psychological impact of such incidents. His face became a symbol of resilience and justice, but the newfound attention was both empowering and overwhelming. Marcus's closest friends urged him to speak out, but his reserved nature made him hesitant. "I just wanted to catch my flight," he told Angela during a strategy meeting. She reminded him that his story had become bigger than just his personal ordeal. It was a rallying cry for change. Eventually, Marcus agreed to give a brief statement. Standing before a sea of microphones and cameras, he spoke from the heart. "I didn't ask for this attention, but if my experience can help ensure that no one else has to endure what I did, then I'll embrace it," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Everyone deserves dignity, no matter who they are or where they're from. The crowd erupted in applause, and his words quickly went viral. Activists began organizing teach-ins and forums, using Marcus's case as a catalyst for deeper conversations about racial bias and inequality. Meanwhile, the airport and security firm found themselves under increasing scrutiny. Former employees started leaking documents to the press, revealing troubling internal practices that prioritize quotas over fair treatment. Lawmakers began calling for hearings to address the systemic issues laid bare by Marcus's experience. Marcus's statement didn't just resonate with activists, it inspired others in positions of power. A senator from Marcus's state contacted Angela, expressing interest in drafting legislation aimed at banning discriminatory practices in airport security nationwide. For Marcus, the whirlwind of events was both surreal and humbling. As he watched the protests and press coverage unfold, he realized that his story had ignited something far beyond what he had imagined. But amid the growing movement, Marcus remained focused on one simple truth: everyone deserves to be treated with respect. The rising tide of support from Marcus and the scrutiny on airport practices triggered a defensive response from those in power. The security company issued a public statement claiming the actions of their staff were in line with protocol, shifting the blame onto Marcus by insinuating he had been uncooperative during the initial check. The narrative quickly gained traction among certain media outlets, painting Marcus as an entitled traveler using his identity to avoid security measures. Clips of the incident were dissected out of context, and online forums buzzed with heated arguments. The backlash was swift and pointed, with detractors labeling him a troublemaker while questioning the legitimacy of his case. Angela was the first to notice the online smear campaign. "They're trying to discredit you," she told Marcus during a late-night call. "But this just proves how much work we have to do." Marcus was hurt, but not surprised. He had faced similar challenges throughout his life. However, this public vilification was a new level of adversity. Amid the attacks, allies emerged. Former passengers who had experienced similar treatment came forward to share their stories. A retired security officer, who had worked with the same company, anonymously revealed a toxic culture within the ranks, detailing how implicit bias often guided decisions. This whistleblower's account began to shift public opinion back in Marcus's favor. Angela strategized their next move, suggesting a detailed press conference where Marcus could clarify his experience and present the evidence. Despite his initial reluctance, Marcus knew this was the right path. "If I stay silent, they win," he said, his resolve hardening. The conference was a powerful moment. With poise and grace, Marcus outlined the events of that day, emphasizing the broader implications of systemic bias. He presented previously unseen security footage that contradicted the claims made by the company. The room fell silent as journalists realized the depth of the injustice. Simultaneously, investigative journalists dug deeper into the security firm's history, uncovering a troubling pattern of misconduct. Lawsuits began to surface, painting a grim picture of systemic discrimination within the industry. The momentum Marcus had built was now unstoppable. The public backlash against the smear campaign forced the company into damage control mode. But the damage had already been done. Marcus, once the target of vilification, had transformed into a symbol of accountability and perseverance. With Marcus's press conference making waves, the impact of his story began to resonate far and wide. People from across the country shared their own experiences with discrimination, using hashtags like #StandWithMarcus and #EqualityInTransit. Social media platforms became a battleground as conversations about systemic racism and security practices surged. In one particularly moving instance, a middle-aged man from Kansas, a teacher and Army veteran, posted a video recounting his humiliation at an airport several years prior. "Watching Marcus stand his ground gave me the courage to speak out," he said, his voice cracking. The video went viral, further underscoring the pervasive nature of the issue. Marcus found himself overwhelmed by the influx of support. Angela helped organize the flood of emails, messages, and calls into actionable steps. They compiled these stories into a report for the legal team, creating a powerful document that illustrated the widespread scope of the problem. The backlash against the security company intensified as these stories surfaced. Protesters gathered outside major airports, holding signs demanding accountability. The sight of diverse crowds united in their demand for fairness was both inspiring and sobering. Meanwhile, Marcus faced challenges in his personal life. His sister, Lisa, had been hesitant about his decision to speak out, fearing the consequences. "This kind of fight can take everything from you," she said during a tense family dinner. Marcus, however, reassured her, "If we don't fight, it'll keep happening. To me, to you, to the kids," he replied, glancing at his young niece. Lisa eventually came around, offering to support him by organizing local events to educate the community about implicit bias and their rights in public spaces. The family's unity became another source of strength for Marcus. The mounting public pressure finally reached the ears of policymakers. Several lawmakers called for a hearing to investigate bias in airport security practices. Marcus was invited to testify, an opportunity he approached with both apprehension and determination. "I never imagined I'd be sitting here," Marcus said during his testimony. "I'm just a man who wanted to board his flight. But what happened to me is part of a larger problem, one that we can no longer ignore." His words resonated deeply, drawing praise from both the public and members of Congress. Marcus's testimony marked a turning point, as the hearing set the stage for meaningful reform. It was clear that the ripple effect of his story was growing stronger, drawing in more voices, more allies, and a clearer vision for change. As Marcus's story gained traction, new allies emerged, but so did unexpected challenges. One evening, Angela burst into Marcus's apartment holding a laptop. "You need to see this," she said, her voice tight with urgency. She played a news clip featuring an anonymous whistleblower, an insider at the security company who revealed that racial profiling was not just a random occurrence, but part of an unspoken policy encouraged by some upper management. "This isn't just your fight anymore, Marcus," Angela said. "This is a systemic issue." The whistleblower's claims ignited a media firestorm, placing the security company under intense scrutiny. Executives scrambled to contain the fallout, releasing vague statements about their commitment to diversity training. But the damage was done. Public trust in airport security was eroding fast, and the company faced calls for an independent investigation. Marcus's phone buzzed incessantly with calls from journalists and activists. While he welcomed the added attention to the cause, the sudden surge of pressure began to weigh on him. He felt like a man standing on a tightrope, balancing the fight for justice with the growing complexities of the movement he had inadvertently become the face of. During a quiet moment, Marcus found solace at a local park. Sitting on a bench, he noticed a group of teenagers playing basketball nearby. Among them was a young boy wearing a T-shirt with Marcus's face and the words, "Stand tall." The sight filled Marcus with equal parts pride and apprehension. "This is bigger than I ever imagined," he thought. However, not all feedback was positive. Online trolls and detractors tried to discredit Marcus, digging into his past for anything that could tarnish his credibility. A baseless rumor about his college years began circulating, threatening to distract from the core issue. Determined not to let the negativity derail him, Marcus held another press conference. "This isn't about me," he said firmly. "It's about creating a future where no one has to endure what I went through. Let's stay focused on the real problem." His calm demeanor and unwavering resolve once again won public favor. In the midst of this chaos, Marcus received an invitation to a high-profile talk show. The host, known for their hard-hitting interviews, promised to provide a platform for Marcus to share his story. Angela hesitated. "Are you sure about this?" "They're known for blindsiding their guests," she warned. Marcus nodded. "If I shy away now, what kind of example am I setting?" The talk show appearance turned out to be a pivotal moment. The host tried to steer the conversation toward Marcus's personal life and the rumors, but Marcus skillfully redirected it to the broader issue of discrimination in security practices. His eloquence and focus left the audience in awe and further solidified his reputation as a strong, principled leader. As the episode aired, Marcus's words reverberated across the nation. People began to see his fight not just as a personal battle, but as part of a collective struggle for fairness and equality. The stage was now set for the twist to come, a development that would test Marcus's resolve like never before. As the movement gained momentum, Marcus's life became a whirlwind of interviews, protests, and speaking engagements. But just when he thought he had uncovered the full extent of the problem, an unexpected twist shook everything. During a routine legal meeting, Angela entered with a grave expression. "We just received a letter from a top lawyer representing one of the executives from the security company," she said. "He wants to meet in private. He claims he has information that could change everything." Marcus was immediately skeptical. Why would an executive, one of the very people enabling these discriminatory practices, want to help? But Angela convinced him to go, citing the potential value of insider information. The meeting was arranged in a discreet hotel conference room. The executive, a middle-aged man named David Morgan, looked nervous as he slid a folder across the table. "I can't stay silent anymore," he said, his voice trembling. Inside the folder were documents, emails, and internal memos outlining a deliberate policy of profiling at airports. Even more shocking was evidence that this policy wasn't just limited to one security company. It was part of a broader network of agencies working together under the guise of enhanced threat detection. Marcus's hands shook as he flipped through the damning evidence. "This is systemic," he muttered, overwhelmed. "It's not just about me or a single incident." David nodded. "I've been complicit for years, and I can't live with it anymore. But if this gets out, I'll lose everything." Angela leaned forward. "Why come forward now? Why trust us?" David hesitated. "Because I've seen the damage this has done, and because I believe Marcus can actually make a difference." But Marcus couldn't ignore the risk. Exposing such a powerful network could lead to legal retaliation, or worse. As he and Angela left the meeting, they both knew the stakes had just been raised. The revelation from David Morgan sent shockwaves through Marcus and Angela's team. They worked tirelessly to verify the documents, cross-referencing every email and memo. What they uncovered painted a harrowing picture, a covert network of profiling policies across airports nationwide, rooted in systemic discrimination. Marcus knew this was bigger than he could handle alone. He called an emergency meeting with civil rights groups, lawyers, and influential figures from the community. As he laid the evidence before them, the room fell silent. Then, the debate erupted. Releasing this could spark lawsuits, one lawyer warned. It could also lead to retaliation, Angela added. These are powerful people we're up against. But a young activist, Elijah, countered, "If we don't act now, this system will keep ruining lives." The team decided to leak the documents strategically through a trusted investigative journalist. Within days, a bombshell expose hit the airwaves, detailing the systemic bias in airport security practices. News outlets and social media exploded. Public outrage was immediate, with protests erupting at major airports. People of all backgrounds rallied behind Marcus, demanding justice and accountability. Yet, as the pressure mounted, so did the risks. Marcus began receiving anonymous threats. Late one night, Angela found a strange car parked outside his home. The fight for justice had become a battle for safety. But Marcus refused to back down. "If we let fear win, they win," he told Angela. Meanwhile, cracks began to form within the security network. Whistleblowers, inspired by Marcus and David's courage, stepped forward with more evidence. The dominoes were falling, but the full consequences were still uncertain. The exposure of systemic discrimination reached its boiling point. Airport officials scrambled to contain the damage, issuing statements of regret while denying knowledge of the network. Public pressure forced congressional hearings, where Marcus was invited to testify. In a packed chamber, Marcus recounted his ordeal and unveiled the broader implications. His calm yet fiery testimony captured the nation. "This isn't just about me. It's about dignity and respect for everyone who walks through those gates," he declared, sparking applause. But the twist wasn't over. During the hearings, one senior executive from the airport security company broke under questioning, revealing secret meetings with lawmakers who had supported biased practices. This revelation linked the discrimination directly to influential figures, causing a scandal that shook the political landscape. As accountability measures were implemented, including mass firings and policy overhauls, Marcus felt a mix of vindication and weariness. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had turned. The old guard's collapse paved the way for lasting reforms. With the scandal fully exposed and systemic reforms underway, Marcus found himself thrust onto a global stage. International organizations reached out, seeking his expertise to address discrimination in other sectors. What began as one man's fight at an airport evolved into a worldwide movement. Marcus collaborated with leaders from various industries, sharing his strategies for dismantling bias. During a high-profile event at the United Nations, he presented a comprehensive framework for equity in public spaces, igniting a global dialogue. Despite his growing influence, Marcus remained grounded, focusing on grassroots efforts while inspiring millions to demand justice. As Marcus's advocacy spread across industries, the global movement took on a life of its own. Communities from different countries adopted his principles, creating localized initiatives to combat discrimination. Marcus was invited to address world leaders at a summit, where he shared stories of ordinary people who became extraordinary advocates for justice. But a challenge arose when Marcus uncovered opposition from influential groups unwilling to let go of discriminatory practices. Instead of retreating, he doubled down, launching a global coalition to tackle entrenched systems of inequality, turning obstacles into opportunities. As Marcus's efforts culminated in systemic change, he chose to step back from the public eye, focusing on mentoring a new generation of leaders. His story became a global symbol of resilience and justice, taught in schools and training programs worldwide. Years later, at a ceremony unveiling a statue in his honor, Marcus reflected on the journey. "This is not about me," he said. "It's about us, all of us, choosing fairness over fear." The crowd erupted in applause, solidifying his legacy as a pioneer of equity and humanity. Thank you for joining us on this eye-opening journey of courage and transformation. Marcus's story challenges us to confront prejudice and reminds us that change starts with each of us. What are your thoughts on his journey? Have you experienced or witnessed moments of injustice that spark change? Share your views in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. If this resonated with you, subscribe to Behind the Hate for more impactful stories that challenge the status quo. Together, we can build a conversation that leads